Hang tight, Doc. I've got this.
Glad you could make it.
We gotta move. Now. There's a storm coming. And hell's coming with it.
Go, go, go! Twilight forever!
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Winter, RTS content creator and generally salty nerd, with another much more experienced nerd here. Kevin Dong, the lead designer of Frost Giant Studios, and for their new RTS Stormgate. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited that we finally announced to the world Stormgate and everything that comes with it. Excited to talk with both you and to share everything we have with the StarCraft audience at large.
Just a quick description in your own words. What is Stormgate?
Right. So Stormgate is our Frost Giants' first game. It is going to be a inspired style RTS that is going to focus a lot on social aspects and a lot on approachability. We hope to create a game that a lot of core RTS fans will love, and also at the same time a game that will be very approachable for the wider audience at large.
Free to play, and there will be 4 main game modes. Can you describe what those game modes are and whether everyone will be able to play them?
Got it. Yeah, of course. As announced, the game is going to be free to play. And here at Stormgate or here at Frost Giant, we've learned a lot of lessons from our time back on the StarCraft 2 team. And one of the core lessons is that really RTS features a lot of players that kind of play in their own little segments. RTS players are highly segmented, and it generally hasn't seemed to be very effective to try to transition for example, PvE players into a PvP mode. So with that in mind, our goal is to really make all the 4 modes, which I'll talk about, very distinct and make each mode the best that it can be as a standalone product. And the 4 modes, of course, are there's going to be this standard traditional campaign mode that's going to deliver breathtaking stories that really build out our lore. There's going to be the cooperative PvE mode that really StarCraft 2 released, and we hope to iterate on. And there's going to be, of course, as a lot of your fans may know, the competitive PvP mode that will feature not only a 1v1 game mode, but also a really fun 3v3 game mode as well. And finally, there is the UGC, the user-generated content or arcade audience, a fun audience that really kind of likes to play in the sandbox.
What I want to ask about is the game engine. In my personal experience, modern RTS, and by modern RTS, I mean essentially anything past StarCraft 2, has just not been able to compete with the StarCraft 2 engine, which is just seems to be so technologically advanced. And if you don't have that solid foundation, it feels like you're not going to have the gameplay to compete with StarCraft 2. Are you confident that the Stormgate engine will be at or above the bar of StarCraft 2? And then what are you going to do with it if you're able to reach it?
Yeah, so Stormgate. When we thought of what a Blizzard style RTS is, we thought of a lot of things. But at the end of the day, we think of the idea of responsiveness, of crispiness or crispness, of great pathfinding. And we realized that over the last 10 years, especially, StarCraft 2 has set such an incredibly high bar for how responsive the game is, how great the pathfinding is, that anything that has come after it has been judged on that benchmark. So for our game in particular, what we've done is, first of all, we brought on James Anhalt, who is the lead pathfinding engineer for StarCraft 2, to head the development of our pathfinding and head our responsiveness. So what we're actually doing is, on top of the Unreal 5 engine, we're building what we call Snowplay, which is a completely custom built and highly configurable gameplay simulation that unlocks low bandwidth play with multiplayer game features. I know that's a mouthful, but essentially what we're doing is trying to recreate the responsiveness that made StarCraft great um, in Unreal 5. And after we do that, we hope to create the gameplay that you are very used to, and the responsiveness that you are used to for in StarCraft 2, and at the same time unlock the ability for players to create their own maps in user-generated content in our engine as well.
You're kind of making an engine on top or within the Unreal 5 engine, using those tools and applying them to your own, essentially your own real-time strategy toolbox.
Yeah, one thing we realized about Unreal Engine is that it's really amazing for visuals. It's really amazing, especially with the updates to Unreal 5 for rendering the game. The cinematic that you saw earlier on June 9th was completely made in engine with Unreal 5. So that's the kind of quality that you can expect from that. However, it needs a lot of tweaks in order to handle RTS gameplay that features a lot of units specifically. So we're building a system completely from scratch on top of that.
Will Stormgate have a larger scale and scope than StarCraft 2? We're talking, I guess, hundreds of units or thousands of units potentially at one time. Can you expect to have these kind of, I guess, almost cinematic scale battles that the StarCraft and Warcraft series don't quite reach?
Yes, currently our tests seem very promising, and we hope to achieve levels that are much higher. I don't know if we expect in a general 1v1 or even a 3v3 game to reach those levels, but hopefully we can unlock that number of units and the power of our engine for user-generated content where you can have thousands of units on the map.
Very cool to hear. Factions. How many? What are they? And what do you plan to do with them to make them unique, distinct, or different than other RTS?
Right. So far we've announced two factions. There's going to be the human faction that is going to be based on Earth. The human faction has gone through a lot. It's in a they've gone through a kind of an apocalypse, but they're coming back from it really stronger than ever. And it's a very hopeful atmosphere. It's been quite a few years since the what happened so many years ago. However, all of a sudden, uh, something happens. A new portal opens, and
Is there a
the
name for this portal?
I don't know. We gotta find a catchy name for this kind of portal. Winter, do you have any names?
Um, Let me see. The Dark Portal.
The Dark Portal. I think that one might already be taken, but if you look in the bottom right of your screen, bottom left, is that how it works? Bottom left of your screen, that might be a name for a portal, a Stormgate. But yeah, from out of the Stormgate, these demons, the infernal host, come out and are ready to invade again. So this is kind of going to be the baseline of our story, and we can't wait as a team to show you more about our story. In terms of units and faction design, one of the key things that we feel like makes Blizzard's RTS what makes a Blizzard RTS is the asymmetry between the factions. All the different units feel like they belong on different factions, and I think that can be most exemplified with the core units of each race in StarCraft 2, for instance. The Zealot, the Marine, and the Zergling all kind of are very symbolic of what the different races are about. Zerg is about overwhelming, for example, with Zerglings in large numbers that are relatively weak. Zealots are about kind of smaller number of very strong units, and Terrans are kind of more about being adaptable and being scrappy. variety. So how we head into faction design is first from the lore perspective, we try to write down adjectives or write down themes of what our different races or what our different factions are about. And from then on, we try to come up with mechanics to fit those themes. At the same time, we're thinking about it from a balance perspective. At each, like let's say tier, for instance, what does every faction need? They need a way to hit ground units. They need a way to hit air units. They need to be able to counter the units um, in their opponent's respective tiers. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of moving parts going on in the process of creating a faction.
When it comes to each mode of gameplay, what kind of restrictions or what kind of design philosophy do you have for units? For example, in co-op and StarCraft 2, it's like, what kind of ridiculous stuff can we add that'll never work in multiplayer? And then for campaign, there's like set of upgrades over time. What kind of design features and restrictions do you see yourself having in each of the four main modes: campaign, co-op, casual, and competitive multiplayer?
I would say I would divide those into two sections: the PVE mode and the PVE modes and the PvP modes. In the PVE modes, we kind of just are able to go hog wild because let's bring it back to StarCraft 2. Amon doesn't feel bad if he gets nuked, right? The enemy, the E part, the environment doesn't feel bad. So we are able to make all the abilities and all the units as like different as possible. And I think that creates a lot of the interesting gameplay that we found back in the StarCraft 2 days. In the PvP side, we are thinking of a lot more restrictions. One of the core gameplay tenets of Stormgate is the idea of territory control, the ability to hold down what area you control, and then the idea of that there is kind of a balance between taking a risk to gain more territory and reaping the benefits from gaining more territory. So one example of that is expanding. We want to encourage players to expand, and we want to encourage players um, to kind of push back and forth between those expansions. And beyond that, there's also the ideas of terrain control, the ideas of defender's advantage. So we want to make sure, because to reinforce all these ideas, we want to make sure that that mobility or the is more limited, for instance. So just to give you an example, Reapers are an example of a unit that are able to traverse terrain very easily in the early game in StarCraft 2, and that creates a lot of restrictions for map makers. It creates the need for Reaper cliffs, for instance. Another idea is warp prisms or even medevacs. They're able to drop entire armies into the enemy base, and that it negates the idea of this territory control. It negates the idea of this defender's advantage. So I could talk a lot about like the different restrictions that we're going to, but this is just one I'll start off with, was units that are less able, or I would say units that are less able to subvert terrain overall. And that includes that includes things such as units that are able to jump cliffs, or units that are able to transport large groups of units, or even air units in particular. That's not to say our game won't have any of these things, but I would say that we want to tone down the power of things that can traverse terrain very easily.
I think we're going to go way more in depth about that. But before I get too far into the more multiplayer balance and design, I just want to talk about co op. I personally don't play a ton of co op in StarCraft 2 because, as a higher level player, it doesn't feel like there's much of a draw past a certain point unless you just want to grind out the levels. Is there a more coherent or endgame approach to co-op in Stormgate? And what lessons from StarCraft 2 are you taking and applying to Stormgate itself?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Winter. Yeah, co-op has had a really interesting journey throughout the history of StarCraft 2. When it was first released in 2015, back in Legacy of the Void, I think the team only thought that players might play maybe 10 hours for a commander, when in reality, players actually played um, hundreds or even thousands of hours per each commander that we released. And the team really had to pivot in order to fulfill those needs. Basically, each year, the team was given an objective of make co-op the best possible in the next year. And we didn't necessarily know if we were going to get we were able to develop it further than that. Are we able to add a next additional step? So what the co-op team did every year was we had a foundation, and we built every subsequent year, we built on top of that foundation and on top of that foundation. And what you ended up with is kind of this tower of Jenga blocks that, yes, every individual block is very strong on its own, but when you take a step back and look at it from far out, it's not as cohesive as we might have wanted it to be. And you can see that in the ideas, especially of customization and of progression. There's maybe 5 overlapping progression systems, and there's 2 separate ways to customize your commander in somewhat interesting ways, but it's not as interesting as we would like it. So with our game in mind, we want to kind of take a step back and design the progression system and the customization systems from the ground up, such that you will have commanders that are more customizable, and players will be able to head into the late game and find challenges in the late game um, for as however long they want to.
Are you thinking about having hero commanders, things that join you on the field and have a bunch of abilities, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I think StarCraft 2 did a great job of balancing both hero commanders and commanders that don't feature heroes on the battlefield. Right now, we're we're looking at a mix between the two. So I would say very similar to what StarCraft 2 has, but again, everything here, we're still early in development, and things are subject to change.
How about in co-op something like leaderboards in the late game or some sort of competitive aspect to it? I'm a bit of a biased perspective, but
Yeah.
are there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you mentioned, Winter, that you are a competitive person, and generally in StarCraft 2 co-op, there was not a very easy way to be competitive in this cooperative mode. I know I myself participated in a lot of speedrunning activities with in cooperative, but this was very niche, and not a lot of players could engage with it because you had to form your own communities in order to engage with that. So what we plan for our game eventually is to add these leaderboards. We want you to be able to compare your progress, compare your skill at the cooperative mode with both people just overall, and also just your friends, to kind of, so you'll have the opportunity to both brag, oh, I'm the second best Zagara player in the world, or I'm the best Zagara player among all my friends in my friend group. So Winter, I don't know how you're going to achieve this. Maybe you'll have to remove some friends from your friends list, but eventually we'll get there.
Bold of you to think I have friends.
Oh.
In Stormgate, is co-op going to be you and your friend, or are there going to be any wider variety of modes?
Yeah, so one of the exciting things that we're happy to announce for Stormgate Co-op is that we're going to expand the number of players that you get to play from 2 to 3 in comparison to StarCraft. We feel like 3 players is has greater opportunity to be sticky. You can invite more of your friends, and there's also greater opportunities for team play. For example, let's say you have 2 objectives that you have to complete. You can either split off into a group of 2 and a group of 1, or a group of 1 and a group of 2, or you can team up in a group of 3 to complete one objective, and then team up in another group of 3 and then subsequently go to the second objective, I would say. There's also the higher possibility for what I like to call wombo combos. The idea that, hey, I have ability A, and it interacts with ability B in an interesting way, but if I add ability C to it, oh no, it gets crazy. It just gets wild. Which really speaks to another one of the iterations that we're making to Stormgate Co-op, which is that we're going to expand the ability for players to cooperate with one another. In StarCraft 2, the initial design of StarCraft 2 Co-op had the mentality of, oh yes, you can solo with your ally, and therefore we won't have too many abilities that help your ally. In Stormgate, we're going to rethink that completely. We're going to say, just from the get-go, every commander will have maybe at least like 4 to 5 different ways to interact with your ally in a meaningful way. And if you compare that to StarCraft, the number there in StarCraft was closer to somewhere between 0 and 2. Trust me, I've done the math on this. Um, Another aspect of cooperative play is a lesson that we learned in StarCraft 2 is that really forced cooperative play does not feel very good. A great example is on the map Lock and Load, where you're stepping on the lock, but your ally isn't stepping on the lock, and you're yelling at your ally, "Hey, please step on the lock," maybe in not as nice terms as what I just said. And the direction we want to take with that is that we don't want any cooperation necessarily to be forced, but we wanted to make it an extreme bonus.
So you talked about 3 players being the new standard for co-op design, but there's also announced the 3v3 team multiplayer, which you pointed out is going to be significantly different than the copy-pasted 1v1 of other, well, Blizzard RTS in the past, especially StarCraft 2. Can you talk more about how it's going to be different and what makes it exciting?
Yeah, so competitive PvP in Stormgate, of course, will consist of 2 separate game modes with completely separate rule sets. There's going to be the 1v1 head-to-head mode, which will appeal, I feel, to a lot of core RTS players, a lot of StarCraft 2 players, such as your audience. And this will focus on a lot of pure player skill and the journey to mastery. We're also going to have a 3v3 team fight mode that's going to be more focused on competitive team play, and we're going to have a looser gameplay model there that allows us to explore a lot of new ideas like objectives of role differentiation and a lot of other innovative elements. So like you said, this is to my knowledge, this is the first Blizzard style RTS that has a team mode built from the ground up rather than necessarily copying and pasting game roles for 1v1. And just an example, something that makes sense in 1v1 but doesn't make sense in team games is the idea of you're not allowed to build creep on your allies. You're not allowed to build buildings on your allies creep. So those are things we're thinking of from the ground up. With these 2 game modes, we think they'll be able to reach a broader audience, but we don't necessarily think players will kind of just play one and play them in a mutually exclusive fashion. We think these game modes will be able to self-reinforce a lot, and they can be enjoyed by very similar players by offering 2 slightly different experiences. Um, one thing another thing we hope this will do is it will not only honor StarCraft's legacy of skill-based competition, but also it'll allow more experienced players to kind of onboard their friends and invite their friends to play Stormgate on the same team.
Before we get in, I've saved the 1v1 multiplayer for closer to last because I know how long I can go on about that. But I want to talk about just keeping people playing. Like, what is going to keep people playing Stormgate just outside of the game? What keeps people playing? Do you have any systems in place? I guess an example would be things like daily quests, cosmetics, stuff like that. What is planned for Stormgate?
Yeah, things such as daily quests, achievements, a lot of that stuff that are in modern games are something that we're not ready to announce right now, but we're heavily thinking of and keeping in mind as we head into the actual release of the game. And just as a whole, we learned a lot on the StarCraft 2 team when we transitioned the game from a box product to a free-to-play games as a service model. Um, and a lot of what that is about is kind of releasing content on a cadence that players can expect to come back to. Content that, for example, you as a streamer, Winter, what's the most important aspect about being a streamer? What makes you successful?
Charisma and personality. And
Oh,
also being able to complain about some new balance patch that breaks everything, or a new DLC, or new loot, or something like that, or new strategy, especially in StarCraft.
where I was going with this is one of the most important things for a
Uh
streamer
oh.
might be the idea of consistency, right? You're you're
Okay.
you're
Yeah,
streaming
yeah, that's good.
every day at the same time, and we feel like for our game, we took a lot of lessons from like games such as Path of Exile, where they're releasing content on a very consistent basis. And let's say you drop off from the game, you're no longer playing Stormgate. If you drop off, you still know, hey, maybe like definitively that in 3 months you can expect new content to drop. There will be no new competitive content, new co-op content, new everything content, and that's a natural point for you to return to the game. So we hope systems like this, systems where there are seasons of content drops that regularly support the game and regularly allow players to come back into the game, will be important for players that play Stormgate. In addition, one thing I'm not the esports guy per se, but one thing that we're trying to do right now is kind of tying the esports of our game with it alongside the seasons of content drops. So, for example, a season of Stormgate WCS might end, and right alongside it, the next content drop comes out, and it's a celebration of that content drop. So tying esports to content is something that we're heavily looking into as well.
All right, it's time, Kevin. We're going to talk about 1v1 multiplayer. Before I say anything else, talk about 1v1 multiplayer.
So a lot of our design, it's a
Just
very
tell me.
open-ended question, Winter.
Yes, it's supposed to be.
Yeah, so I would say a lot of our designs and philosophies around 1v1 player also apply to our competitive 3v3 mode. We think like designing an RTS is has a lot of fundamental that shares a lot of fundamental similarities between the various game modes. For our 1v1 multiplayer, we're taking a lot of inspiration from places like Warcraft 3, like StarCraft 1, Brood War, like StarCraft 2, and we're also taking a lot of inspiration from other RTSs. I know you've played Age of Empires recently. One of our favorites on the development team is the Company of Heroes franchise. But just overall, even outside the Blizzard universe, there's been so many innovations and so many interesting mechanics that you don't get to explore if you're just within a Blizzard RTS. There's also a lot of new ideas just in general gaming that we kind of take inspiration from. But of course, we're a Blizzard style RTS first and foremost, so we're going to start from there, and we're going to take a lot of lessons learned from years and years of esports and years of competition with StarCraft 1, with Warcraft 3, and with StarCraft 2. We have a lot of knowledge about what worked and what didn't there, and we're going to take a lot of those lessons and kind of try to bring them into the design of Stormgate.
Hey everyone, Void Winter here. After looking over everything with Kevin and how in depth we get about 1v1 multiplayer, who would have thought, right? I decided to split this interview into a couple parts. First, we have everything that you've seen here, co-op, single player, and the 3v3 mode. But the next interview will be an in-depth look and a bit of a retrospective on StarCraft 2 and what Stormgate is going to be doing in the future. So if you're a fan of StarCraft 2 multiplayer, I think you're really going to like it. Here's a few highlights from that, but make sure to tune in when it's released. Thank you again to Kevin, and thank you for watching. Make sure to smash that like button, of course, and check out playstormgate.com as well as wishlisting it on Steam. Good luck, have fun, stay chill. You know that the balance designer for StarCraft 2 was David Kim. How do you feel about being the next David Kim?
I can't say that I will be the next David Kim, but I can say that I will be the first Kevin Dong. In terms of comeback mechanics, I would say that we're trying to make it so that comeback mechanics are more on a faction by faction basis. Yeah, we're still definitely experimenting with heroes in all our game modes. We are really focused on the idea of territory control. So we want players to be expanding all the time. We want players to be able to take that territory, and hopefully it can be like a back and forth where the battle lines are always being shifted, and you can tell who's controlling what territory and who's winning just based off of the mini map.